Welcome, everyone. I'm Sue Barber, author, former IT director for a Fortune 500 company, turned executive coach, and this is the Visibility Factor podcast, where we explore how to raise your visibility and play bigger at work and in life. We'll explore key topics and welcome guests that help you shift your thinking about yourself so you can see new possibilities for your leadership. I'm on a mission to create a visibility movement for leaders to show their value and be seen for their true talent. Are you ready to take the next step towards a higher level of visibility for yourself? Let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Visibility Factor podcast. This is Sue Barber, your host. I am so excited today to share with you my guest, Tammy Gooler Loeb, who has written an amazing book called Work from the Inside Out: Break Through 9 Common Obstacles and Design a Career that Fulfills You. She put this book out in 2022. There are so many things in here that you're going to be able to leverage if you are going through career transition or trying to figure out if you want to do a pivot of some sort for your career. I am so excited to have you here, Tammy. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sue. I really appreciate being here and having an opportunity to talk about the book and the work that I've done around it, because even though the book has been out 4 years, it's as relevant today as it was when it came out. We were living in a time where uncertainty is at a height. And I don't mean for that to sound too trite, but it is a time when people's fears can get heightened, and around work and finances and stability and security. And I think that the book offers some real life stories of actual people who have made very careful decisions and careful transitions in their lives so that they could both take good care of themselves and their families, but also find greater meaning and satisfaction in their careers. And that's been my goal all along in 26 years of being an executive leadership and career coach, trying to help people find a much more satisfying and happier path in their careers, because we spend more time at work than we do just about anything else in our lives. And it's amazing to me how many people spend years, decades in a job, in a line of work that they really don't find all too satisfying. And we see this in a lot of the research out there on employee engagement, or we should say employee disengagement. And I would say that some of that is unnecessary, that really people could be finding themselves in a more satisfied position. And I'm not even talking about things like, find your dream job, the ultimate perfect job. I'm just talking about baseline, being satisfied and finding meaning in what you're doing. And that's really what I'm trying to help people with this book.
I love all of that. And it is so relevant right now, especially with so many layoffs, that we hear about from so many different industries. And I think even for the newer generations, they really want to find meaning in what they're doing. So I think that is also so relevant for them too.
Yeah.
So I know that you've described this a little bit, but I would like you to help listeners really hone in on, is this book for me? And I want you to think about maybe who are the people that come to work with you, or who are the people who have really responded in the biggest way to your book?
Well, first, I want to tap into something you just mentioned, which is people who are earlier in their careers. Because when I first wrote the book, I thought it was really targeted towards people who were mid to later career, people who had already been around the block at least once and had been kind of dialing it in for a long time. And if you've been dialing it in, you know what dialing it in means, which means you've been around for a while. And what surprised me after the book came out was that a lot of my daughter's friends in their late 20s, mid-late 20s, they were reading the book and they were getting a lot out of it, which really surprised me. So I think I had too narrow a view of the audience for the book. I think there were people who really found, a view that they could take by seeing what these stories had to share with them. And so the audience for the book is really quite broad. I would still say that my original target is probably still the primary audience, people in the middle of their careers and later on in their careers. And part of it depends on how you want to frame it as you're going through it, because even though it's focused on career, you could really take some of the ideas in the book and apply it even to your retirement years. There are things that, for example, I think one of the chapters that you and I talked about prior to hitting record is the whole notion of it's never too late. And the idea that it's never too late to learn new things, or I've heard a lot of people say, even people like in their late 30s say, oh, it's too late to go back to school. I couldn't possibly do that. And sometimes it's, an issue of finances, but there's other things where people, I'm too old to go back to school. And there's nothing further from the truth. I have stories of people in their 40s and 50s who went back to school and got nursing degrees, law degrees, and had very, very fruitful careers, second careers, third careers. And I just heard recently from a childhood friend of mine that his mother went and got her law degree in her late 50s. I knew she had been a lawyer, but I didn't realize how late in life she had done that. And so these are the things that you don't have to limit yourself in terms of finding your way. And so that's why I make the point about people who are perhaps winding down from some kind of longer term or lifelong career and wanting to really pivot into something else. And I'm not saying, oh, go to law school, but learning new things, or maybe allowing yourself to take some courses or get a certification, or, you're never too old to learn new things. So don't limit yourself.
Yeah, I love that, because I thought about that myself when I left craft after so many years. I thought,
yeah,
do I have the energy to start all of this from a brand new place? Right.
Right.
And I remember reading an article that, I don't know, showed up on LinkedIn or something. It was a list of all of these people who didn't start their companies or their big careers that we all know about until they were 50.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, if they can do that,
Exactly.
I can certainly go down this path and figure it out. So it was a really motivating moment, I think, when I saw that. And that's really good for people to hear. And if you're not with people who have done that, you just don't think it's possible until someone puts it in front of you and gives you the option to consider it, at least.
Absolutely. And, there's another aspect to this, and that is, don't compare yourself to other people. Maybe you don't have the same energy level that somebody else does. That's fine. So do it your own way. Know yourself first and figure out what you want and go for it. But go for it in your own way, and don't be hard on yourself. I think too often people compare themselves to other people, and they miss out on what they could benefit from in the process. And it's unfortunate, because then they might live with some regrets that they don't have to. Yeah. And the other thing I want to point out here is that I've heard people say, oh, I don't want to start all over again. And I say, there's no way you could start all over again, because you bring with you all the wisdom, skills, experience that you've already gained up till this point. You may not apply them in the way that you've been using them, but that experience doesn't just poof, disappear. You're not starting from ground zero. You're starting from a place of experience and discernment, and you have that to bring with you to whatever you do next. So again, dispelling some of these myths that keep people holding themselves back from an opportunity to grow and develop and continue to enjoy their lives.
Yeah, I love that. And you have so many great stories. I was telling Tammy before we started that I selected 3 of the obstacles from her book that I thought would really resonate with you as a listener. And she also has, some that she has as favorites too. So we'll try to get to all of these as much as we can. The interesting thing that I also love before we get into that is the way you lay out the chapters really interspersing people's own words about their experiences and what they went through, your
Mhm.
own experiences as well. But at the
Mhm.
end, what I love is you do a little bit of an assessment, just a
Mhm.
question to ask yourself, and then a bunch
Mhm.
of resources that
Mhm.
people can kind of take the journey and continue for that specific obstacle. Brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. I feel like you can't lay all this stuff out in front of people and not give them the resources that could be helpful to them to get to the next steps.
Yeah.
It's not just a matter of, okay, go for it. Well, now here's a variety of resources that can help you get started. Because
Hmm.
most of the time when people are afraid to take the next step, and that's sort of the thread through the whole book is what are the fears that hold people back is that they don't have enough information. That's more likely what the issue is. And so the fear of what they don't know, it's hard to step into something when you feel like you don't know something, but you're not even aware. It's like you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's important about the resources is it gives you a view into what's possible and some of the information, or at least places to look for the information so that you can start to imagine yourself engaging with some of these areas.
So I would love you to define work from the inside out, because I think that is a foundational piece that people
Hmm.
should be thinking about as we walk through these obstacles.
So work from the inside out means that when you are considering what's next for you, that you are checking in with yourself first. You are literally having a conversation with yourself, whether you're doing it out loud or inside your own head. You're listening to the messages that you've probably been sending yourself for a long time and may have almost on automatic pilot been ignoring them or tampering them down. You know, I always wanted to learn more about this, or if I was younger, I would have pursued this or that. Well, no one's saying that if you're in your 50s and you wished you had become a gymnast, that you should start learning to do gymnastics, okay? But it doesn't mean that there's not something relative to that or something that gives you that, taps into that interest or that feeling that you couldn't start to look into. So the idea is, though, that you're tapping into that inner voice, that inner message, the things that are important to you. We call those our values. And, what's most important to you? Now, a lot of people will say their families are important to them. Well, what's important about that? Well, to make sure they're safe and they're secure and they're comfortable. Yes. And I would say that especially for working parents, you want your children to grow up seeing what it's like to be a happy and satisfied working adult. So how do you introduce your children to what it looks like to be a happy and satisfied working adult? And how do you begin to have conversations with them at a very young age about what interests them, what they might aspire to? And I don't mean what do you want to be when you grow up kind of conversation, but just help them to pursue the things that excite them and that they're interested in. Not that you're going to start grooming them for a career when they're 5 years old, but helping them to see, how do I pursue something I'm interested in and learn more about it? And you're the role model for that. And so if, for example, your value is family, that's one way to put that out there. Or if you have a real value for health or healthcare, that may be an area that you want to look into further, versus for the better part of your career, you were working with widgets or something else that just didn't reflect that. So inside out really means listening to that inner voice, your intuition, your instincts. We all have them, but we also have been very practiced at listening to the outside voices, the external messages. So for example, someone like myself, I'm in my mid 60s. My parents were born 1930. They grew up during the Depression. So it's not unusual for someone in my generation to have been I've gotten a lot of messages about, you don't worry about loving your work. That's a luxury. You need to put food on the table and a roof over your head. And if you accomplish that and have some extra money in the bank, you are doing great. Now, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. And to be honest with you, I wasn't raised that way. I was raised to really think about what I cared about and what was meaningful to me, which is how I landed where I am. I'm very fortunate. But I would say that most of the people around me really were, I think, raised to believe that you get a good job. Now, what does that mean? It's all from the outside going inward. Or, hey, you're really good at math. You should become a math teacher, or you should become an accountant. How many people do you know went ahead and pursued a career based on what other people told them they were good at? So people went ahead and they did things that they were good at because they thought that was the right thing to do. And then they reach a point in their lives where they're making a good living. They got the house, the 2.3 children, the white picket fence, the American dream, and they realize they're not at all moved by what they're doing. They're not that happy. They're not engaged, but they're good at it. So one of the chapters in the book is all about don't just do what you're good at. Find something you love. And when you do that, your chances are you're also going to be good at it. So that's where we start to look at where the inside out piece comes in.
I love that because I talk about that in my new workbook, which is, are you doing something that is being thrust upon you, right? Like take over our business in the family, or go be a lawyer because I'm a lawyer,
Right.
whatever the parents push it might be, right, for that person.
Yeah.
And then they get there and they do it and they're, this is miserable. I don't really want to be doing this. You're talking about the outside in piece. It's external validation. I want my parents to approve of what I'm doing.
And I think the other part of that is that's what you grew up with. That's what you know. And so that to you is an admirable thing to do. So it could be something you felt pressured into. It could also just be, well, this is what, my parents did, or my grandfather did it. My father did it. So I guess I should do it too. And it just becomes kind of that family tradition kind of thing. Like, this is all I know. Some people just don't question those things. And they reach a point where they say, wait a minute, what did I do? And sometimes they stick with it. And that's unfortunate, especially if they recognize that it really isn't what they wanted. And I get to interview a lot of those people on my podcast. So, because those are the people who decided to make some changes. And I think we live in a time now where people making those kinds of changes is far more acceptable and more the norm than it was years ago. Although even years ago, there was some sort of statistic about that most people did change careers at least once in their lifetime. So even though we had this view of one or both parents being in the same career their entire lives, there usually was some other pivot that might have happened along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, I think about my parents and my grandfather all worked at the same company at some point along the way. And so I followed in their footsteps because Kraft and General Foods became one company. So I became a legacy in so many ways to their careers and what they did. And I thought I'd stay there my entire life, that I would never leave and go do something else. And so you just never know. And that's what I love about some of these stories. So I want to jump into a couple of these. The first one is, and I'm going to read a couple things here, everybody. So I just loved some of the language. So we're going to talk about fear or foe. That is I think that's your first,
Yes,
one of your
it's the
first
first
chapters,
chapter.
right? So I love what you wrote here. I don't mean to totally condemn our fears, as they can help us to weigh our options and make thoughtful choices. The key is to recognize when our fears block us from making positive choices. When they are, I'm going to say, quote unquote, disguised, because I loved that word, when they are disguised as logical thinking, but will actually keep you stuck in an unhappy or stagnant situation. I loved that line because I think that is so common. Everybody's thinking logically, And that logic is getting in the way sometimes
Mm-hmm.
of helping them get unstuck.
Absolutely. Great examples of that are people will say, well, if I try to go change my career to do something more meaningful, there's an automatic assumption attached to that means they're going to have to take a salary cut, or that they're going to
Hmm.
have to go work in a nonprofit job, and that nonprofit automatically means a salary cut or a step backwards. And there's all these assumptions tied to that fear around making a change, or well, if I make this change, what if it doesn't work out and I don't like it? I don't want to set myself up for that. And so it seems very logical that you wouldn't want to, you know, put yourself in harm's way. And so it feels totally legitimate. And in fact, it's just a great way to keep yourself in the same spot for a long time and be really kind of comfortable in your discomfort.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, the number one thing that I see with people is fear or telling themselves a story which allows them to stay safe and allows them to
Hmm.
stay in, maybe in a job that they don't love.
Right.
And all of that, I'll say the shoulds, right? Everybody's
Yep.
got these shoulds that they're operating from, some of which we just talked about,
Yeah.
family pressures or family expectations, those types of
Hmm.
things too. If you look at, used an example of Chip in the story that you shared in that chapter, and he did a really big career pivot, and,
Yeah.
honestly, multiple actually. So,
Yeah.
and because of his career pivots, what I loved about his story, so he went from, keep me honest here, he went from being a minister to being an FBI agent to then owning his own company and
Yes.
running all of those things. What
Yeah.
I loved about his story is he really, I always think about it as like you're picking up these tools along the way in your career,
Hmm.
and every one of his roles helped him with the next one.
Hmm.
And I think
Absolutely.
that is so encouraging, I hope, to people, because you never know what you're going to need in your next role. And
Hmm.
just looking back at what you've already got in your toolbox could be really helpful for you.
And he's a perfect example of that,
Hmm.
perfect example, being a minister and then, a few years later doing hostage negotiations and talking people down off the streets who they were looking for to bring in because they had warrants out for their arrests, and trying to get them to surrender. And he knew how to have those conversations with people, partially because he was trained, but also his ministry background helped him to connect with people in very vulnerable places. So it really helped.
Yeah. I want to
Yeah.
read just a part of that section where you talk about it. Chip used empathy and active listening to understand people's fears and then spoke with them directly about those feelings. He does the same thing today as a coach and consultant in his work with leaders, managers, and executives in the workplace. He claims that if you just look at the conduct or circumstances of what occurred without understanding the underlying fear that is driving someone's actions, you can't help them change their behavior. You talked about other audiences for your book. I was thinking from a coaching perspective, that is what you and I are constantly looking at, right? What is the story you might be telling yourself or the experience you
Yeah.
had that is holding you back?
Hmm.
And I think that's so common.
Yeah, and I also want to put an umbrella over all of this, that, we're talking about things that most people do that limits them. And it's not in the spirit of being critical or judgmental of them, because we all, in one way or another, either do or have done these things to ourselves. We've all limited ourselves in one way or another in various contexts. So it's not like you and I are sitting here like we're coaches. We never do things like this to ourselves. That's not the point. And so I want to be clear that these are very human things. And yet some people do see their way through to break through some of them to get to a place where they really are happier. And our goal here in this conversation is to hopefully touch some more people who can see their way through to some happier places. But it's not about saying, well, we know so much better than anyone else does, because we're all on a learning curve. But I think that what I love about telling stories about people is that they're each in their own way. They're relatable. Now, not everybody becomes a minister, and not everybody then pivots to become an FBI agent.
Uh-huh.
That is definitely one of the most unique examples I've got, but it's one of my favorites too.
I just think it's so incredible.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because, of course, Tammy and I have been working on ourselves and our own stories for many years, and they continue to
Yeah,
show up even though we've been working on them. So,
that's
yeah,
right.
we definitely don't have it all figured out, everyone.
No, no.
I know we talked a little bit about it's never too late. So I'm going to skip over to you need to network, but not just for a job.
Yes.
And I know that that is one that everybody has some challenges with is the
Yeah.
networking side of it. So I
Yeah.
want to talk about you at the very beginning of that chapter. You talk about there are 3 buckets I suggest you examine with regard to your relationship with networking: mindset, feelings, and approaches.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to have you talk a little bit about those and how those can get in the way of someone
Mm-hmm.
wanting to do networking.
Mm-hmm. Well, so first of all, the mindset. So the mindset is a lot of people feel daunted because they have a view of what it means to network. So in a way, it's a mindset, but it's also a framework. What is your framework for networking? And I tapped into this a little bit ago about the idea that when you're trying to consider making a change, chances are very, very good that you need more information. So my version of networking is really focused in on getting more information. So a lot of people think of networking as being put on the spot and having to show up as their brightest, shiniest selves in some uncomfortable event-like situation where they've got to shake hands and kiss babies and hand out business cards. And that is furthest from what I'm talking about here. It's not to say that you might not go to events and meet people, but the goal of networking is to get more information and gain that understanding of what's out there. I hear a lot of people say, well, there's not much out there in the job market. And I said, well, where have you been looking? Well, Indeed, LinkedIn. And it's like, well, that's maybe 10 or 15% of the marketplace. Let's talk about what's really out there. Where can you get the information you need? Well, it's often by talking to other people who are actually out there working in different places, different industries, different types of companies, things like that. So the mindset has to be, I need information. That's your mindset. It's not even about, I need to tell people great things about me and feel like I'm on the spot all the time. So that's the mindset. I want to say, get out of your own way. Stop worrying about how you're going to show up and tell people how great you are. And instead, and this is sort of a blend between emotions and mindset. They really go hand in hand. I like to quote Dale Carnegie on this one. But Dale Carnegie said something along the lines of be interested, not interesting. And the more that you show interest in other people and other situations, they will then take interest in you, and you will have something to speak to because you're reflecting back on what's already been started in a conversation about what they've been telling you about their situation or their view of what they've been dealing with professionally. So you'll have something to bounce off of. It's not just about using some kind of elevator pitch that you've memorized over and over again. I'm not a big believer in those anyway. So that's the emotionality around that, is really to sort of get out of your own way and stop telling yourself that, I don't like to network. It makes me anxious. Well, I understand why it makes you anxious, because you're putting yourself in a very uncomfortable situation. So I would say the emotionality is, how can you get the information you need in a way that does feel more comfortable to you? Get more comfortable Find more comfortable ways. If you're an extreme introvert, well, even extreme introverts are good conversationalists, but they're better off in small group or one-on-one conversations. So don't go to big events. You don't have to go to big events to network, and find ways to connect with people that really suits you. And there's great resources in the book that point to some wonderful books on this topic. There's been a lot written about it. The other kinds of information that people can get, which I think also puts them at ease emotionally, is looking for information that's beyond your normal, let's say, Google search. So, for example, people forget that their public library is an amazing resource. Get connected with a reference librarian. Be best friends with them. They're going to help you source all kinds of marketplace and professional information that you will not have at your fingertips as easily. And that will help empower you and help you feel more confident in what you do know so that you can ask even better questions in conversations. But it also may point out resources and avenues to you that you haven't thought of to start looking in various directions for the kinds of things you want to do. So, empower yourself with information that will build that emotional piece, that confidence.
And is there anything else on approaches that you want to add in?
I think they're all blended together. I think when it comes to approaches, I would say start with your warmest network, people that you feel comfortable with initially, people you trust, and start from there. And then when you're at the end of a conversation with somebody, of course, you want to thank them. You want to ask them, is there anyone else you'd recommend I speak with at this point? And then complete the conversation by saying, is there anything I can do to be helpful to you? Because that, again, changes the emotional feeling and the mindset. It shows that you're approaching that networking from a more level playing field. It's not just about you being the person who needs help, but there's an understanding that networking is a reciprocal process. And it really is. And when you offer to help someone else at the end of one of these conversations, they're going to remember that you offered to help. The likelihood that they're going to ask you for anything is relatively low. So you don't have to worry about what they're going to ask of you. Well, why would I offer to help them? What if I can't help them? Don't worry about that. Like, really don't worry about that.
Yeah.
And if they do ask you for help, well, then that means they have confidence in you. That should make you feel good. But otherwise, just know making the offer has a very nice impact. Of course, make the offer sincerely, but people don't do that. And always follow up with a quick little thank you email. And then follow up in a reasonable period of time to give them an update, or follow up with a question, or follow up with thank you again for that conversation we had. It was very helpful. And you really have to keep track of these things. So those are all things that are part of the approach. And some people find this daunting. Some people find it to be a pain in the neck. And it is. But these are the building blocks that really create the kinds of opportunities that are going to be far more meaningful to you in the long run. And these are the things that people should be doing, whether they're in a job they love or looking for the next thing. They shouldn't be waiting till they're ready to look, or waiting till they're unhappy to be nurturing these relationships in this way. They should always be in conversations with people. Now, maybe when they're actively looking for the next thing, they're going to be elevating the pace and the intensity of it. But this kind of mindset around networking should never go away. They always should be building these relationships and keep it reciprocal, because people will come back to you at some point, because everyone's going to be in the same shoes you're walking in right now.
Yeah. 100%. And I know you talk about Dory Clark, who some on the podcast may or may not know, but she is an entrepreneur, a professor. She's written some amazing books, but also, even done stuff in theater and all kinds of things. Like, she's just amazing. a quick story about her. When I first left craft, I started listening to a bunch of podcasts. And that must have been when one of her initial books was coming out. And so it seemed like every podcast I was listening to, she was a guest. And I was trying to figure out how come she's on all these podcasts. I didn't understand the launch process at that point. But yes, such a smart woman. And
Yes.
the story about how she has just built up relationships along the way is incredible. So I really want to encourage everyone to read that story in your book, because I think it is so helpful.
And she's an introvert, by the way.
Yes.
And she is one of the best networkers I know.
Yeah.
And she is great at connecting other people to each other. So absolutely. I'm a member of her recognized expert community. She teaches a course to help other people who want to get their message out. And yeah, I mean, just phenomenal how she's done that.
Love that. Okay. So I want to just share a few things that you share at the end of the book, because I think they're very inspiring. There's a lot of great quotes in this book, by the way, everyone. So you definitely want to check those out. But one is Die with Memories, Not Dreams, by Andra Watkins. Nobody wants to have regrets on their deathbed. So I'm hoping that people start to hear some of the messaging that we're sharing with you and start to think about, is there something inside of me that's telling me, sending me a message through intuition or through other means that I may want to do something else and I should at least explore it. You don't have to do it, but just explore it.
I'm so glad you said that. Susan, I'm so glad you said that, because I think that's what stops people is when they start to think about maybe making a change. In their mind, they go from A to Z. And they forget that there's B, C, D, E, F. There's all these steps in between. And that's the beauty of the stories in the book, is it shows you that there are people who had an idea of something they wanted to pivot into. And for some of them, it took them years to get there. But you then understand how they went about doing it and how glad they were that they did. And I think when people start to think, oh, it's going to take too long, or I can't picture myself in that spot that I think I'd like to be, because they're skipping all the pieces in between, when in fact, the pieces in between are not just a means to an end. You learn a lot about yourself in the process of getting there. And you may even end up landing somewhere that's not exactly like where you thought you were going to go.
Right.
So it really is worthwhile to give yourself the gift of patience with the process. So very important.
100%. Okay. I'm going to leave everybody with this last quote. Jenny Lisk, you talk about in the book, has this quote and says, if your life is the same 5 years from now as it is today, would you be okay with that? If the answer is no, or especially if the answer is hell no, then now is the time to do something about it. And I want everybody to think about that, because time goes by so much faster than you realize. And pretty soon it is 5 years from now and you're in the exact same place that you were in before and nothing is different. And I use that question with people I'm coaching because I want them to see you can stay here if you want. And if that's where you want to be, great.
Yeah.
But if you want something to be different, now is the time to start doing something about that. So I love that you put that in there.
Yeah, that's an anchor in the book. And I'm so grateful that I got that from Jenny. And I give her credit for that every time, because it really does land. I don't think anyone's ever heard that quote and not had it really land within them. And I think the key with all that is it's a choice. You can look at your life now and say, do you want your life to look like this a year from now, 5 years from now? And if you say no, well, what can you do today to start looking elsewhere? No one's telling you have to make a complete change by tomorrow.
No.
But what can you do now to start giving yourself the opportunity to consider some other options?
And I want to just say that I think that is a lot of what your book offers, right? Is stories, examples, possibilities, resources that help people start to see another way, another path
Mm-hmm.
that they could at least explore. So I
Yeah.
love that. Okay, we're going to transition into what I call the Rise Up and Be Visible quick tips. These are 4 questions that I ask every guest. So the first one is, what do you think visibility is and why did you answer that?
So I think visibility is showing up. And I answered it that way because when people find their way into a new opportunity or land in a place they wanted to be, it's because they showed up. It may not have been fully intentional. I hear people, well, I was just lucky. And I'm thinking, well, you were lucky, but you had to make a choice to show up. And once you show up, you're visible in whatever context that is. And that has afforded you some kind of either new opportunity in one way, shape, or form.
Yes, I love that. What are you doing to be visible?
Well, I'm doing it right now. I'm on your podcast, and I'm also trying to increase my visibility by getting help with getting my message out and not trying to do it all myself. And I think that's also an important message that I try to send people all the time is who or how can you get help to move your agenda forward? If you have an important message you're trying to get out there, don't assume you have to do it all yourself.
Yeah.
And get help, especially in the areas that are not necessarily your strengths, and figure out what that is. And I can tell you from the help I've gotten, it's made a tremendous difference in me being able to then do what I do so much better.
Yeah, makes such a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what is the best career or leadership advice you've received?
The best career leadership advice I received was many years ago. I really wanted to be self-employed, and I wasn't sure that I knew how to get there. I was told by one of the directors in my MBA program, and she said, get a part-time role as kind of a financial anchor, and then start to build the consulting, the self-employment around that. So in other words, she was saying to me, don't go from A to Z,
Right.
Start at M, or G or H or something. And now it did help that I was married at the time and I had another income and I had a partner who was supportive. So I was able to make that happen, and I was able to maintain part-time employment for several years while I built a consulting practice. And then I found coaching, and that became the thing I really put on my wings and flew off with. But that was just a really solid piece of advice that opened me up to that whole notion of try to go incrementally.
Yeah, I love the A to Z. I hope everybody can really think about that because I do think so many people do go all the way to Z. I usually describe it as like you're trying to climb a mountain and we're just trying to take the first step here. We're not trying
Right.
to not trying to get all
Yeah.
the way up to the mountain.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. What is a book you would recommend?
Oh my goodness. Well, I could recommend The Visibility Factor for sure. But I guess I probably should think of something other than your book or my book, right? I just interviewed Margaret Andrews. You know Margaret.
Yes, we were just in a
Okay.
webinar together.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So I just interviewed her on my podcast, and she just came out with a book. So her full title of her name, Margaret C. Andrews, and her book is Manage Yourself to Lead Others: Why Great Leadership Begins with Self-Understanding. And it is built on a course that she teaches at Harvard, but I like the premise behind the book because I happen to believe that it's not just about being a leader of a team or of an organization, but it really builds on how do you be a leader in your life and how do you build on your own self-knowledge and self-awareness as a grounding point, as a stability point to then go out into the world and be the best you can be and be the most satisfied you can be. And I think that the way the book is organized, it really gives you a lot of what you need to develop that self-knowledge or to, I'd say, leverage it, both, within an organization, but also for yourself. I just thought it was brilliant, really brilliant.
Love it. Yeah, she was brilliant on the webinar for sure. And so I just posted about that on LinkedIn this week. So we're in 11/21, everyone. So when you hear this episode, it might be a little bit later than that. But and she's going to be on the podcast in January. So I'm excited to have her come on and talk about her book and her class and all the great things that she's doing.
Yeah.
So, love it. Okay, so if people want to learn more about you, your book, your work, what is the best place for them to go?
I would say the best place to go is my website, and that is tammygoolerloeb.com. And if you start to type that in, it will come up because there is no other Tammy Gooler Loeb out there. So even if you don't spell it correctly, you'll find me. I'm on LinkedIn as also Tammy Gooler Loeb. I love hearing from people. I love people who want to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just send me a quick note. Let me know that you heard me on this podcast and reach out and say hello.
Yeah. And she means what she says. So please do that. And I just think what you have written is creating possibilities for people. I just think that is what this gift is that you're giving to people. Of course, there's a lot of pieces to it that are resources and all of that, but just figuring out what the obstacles are for people, the top obstacles is one piece, but then leveraging the stories and the statistics and the research around helping people understand how that might be impacting them, I think is so valuable for people to leverage. So thank you for what you're doing in the world. Thank you for writing this book, and thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Susan. This has been great. And I really appreciate you highlighting the whole notion of bringing possibilities to people, because that's exactly what I'm trying to do.
Excellent. All right, everybody. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please check her out on LinkedIn and her website. And thank you so much for being on the Visibility Factor podcast. And we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks so much for listening to the Visibility Factor podcast. Remember that visibility starts with small steps that are intentional and consistent each day. Be bold, be visible, be the leader you were meant to be. Find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Follow us on all of our social media platforms, which are highlighted in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Visibility Factor podcast.